I've always been lucky. Not the win the lottery kind of lucky, but the dodge a bullet kind. And let me tell you, I'll take that kind of luck any day. Sometimes it's the little things like finding a crumpled bill on the ground, just enough for bus fare on a rain-soaked day. Other times, it's bigger. Like stepping out to take a leak moments before some wasted idiot you were standing next to decides to start throwing punches. Or the time I literally dodged a bullet a shot fired by a buddy who didn't know the gun was loaded. But that's a story for another time. I wasn't anything special in high school. My grades were average, my prospects even worse. The recession hit our town like a plague. Foreclosures, layoffs, every week brought new stories of friends spiraling into bottles or pill bottles. It was like watching people drown one by one. I knew I had to get out before I was pulled under too. So for once, I listened to my dad. I enlisted. The Navy and Coast Guard were out. I couldn't swim to save my life. The Army tempted me, but in the end, I chose the Air Force. Maybe it was some family tradition. My grandpa had been a flyboy in Korea. As it turned out, I scored high on the SEV, and after boot camp, I got sent to Aircraft Metals Technology School. Fancy name for machinist training. Math kicked my ass, but the hands-on work that I could do. By the end of it, I could work a lathe or a welder like I was born to it. Then came my deployment orders, Iraq. For a split second, I saw myself at some remote base, dodging mortar and praying every night. But my luck held. I got assigned to a unit in the Green Zone. If you don't know, the Green Zone was like a fortress in Baghdad, a walled-off stretch of land with the Tigris River hugging its side. It was supposed to be safe, but safe in a war zone is just a word. The day I arrived, they welcomed us with mortar fire. Some idiot in Sarja City lobbed a few rounds over, like clockwork. Most of the time, their aim was trash, their equipment worse. That day, one of those rounds hit a shop I just walked out of. 5 minutes earlier, I'd been in there chatting. Lucky for me. Not so lucky for the two guys who didn't leave when I did. But that's not the story I wanted to tell you. No, this is about her. She wasn't a girl, not exactly. More like a woman, but young mid-20s maybe. She had a dancer's body, all lean muscle and fluid grace. Like every move was poetry in motion. Her face was sharp, perfect, but it was her eyes that stopped you cold. Steel blue. Not the dull kind, but an icy, unnatural blue that seemed to glow. Even in the harsh desert sun, they didn't just look at you. They pierced you like they could see straight through your skin, your bones, right into the dark little corners you try to keep hidden. I first saw her about a month after I arrived. I was walking with some buddies, trying to blend into the monotony of war, when something tugged at my attention. There, in the shadows of a narrow alley, she stood, perfectly still, watching. It was late afternoon, the sky bleeding into twilight. She stood in the alley, draped in shadows, wearing men's clothes of an older style, boots scuffed from hard travel, loose trousers, and a fitted jacket. Around her neck, scarves of many colors were tied, and another scarf, dark and worn, was draped over her head. It should have hidden her face, but instead, it only framed her unsettling beauty. She was the kind of woman who could wear a man's clothes and somehow seem even more feminine, more otherworldly. Her face was partially obscured, but her eyes, those eyes glowed in the dim light like cold embers, cutting through the shadows. They caught mine, and for a moment, it felt as if she saw straight into me, peeling back layers of thought and memory. Her gaze held mine for a beat too long, and then she laughed. Not with her mouth, but with her eyes, as though mocking me for daring to look. I stopped dead in my tracks. The air felt heavier, charged. My friends, oblivious, asked why I'd stopped. Their voices broke the spell. I turned to them, stammering, look in the alley, that girl." They frowned, squinting into the growing dark. "What girl?" I turned back, but she was gone. The alley was empty, a void where moments ago she had stood. My friends laughed, ribbing me for the rest of the day. "Your girl crazy," they teased. Or maybe just losing it in this heat. I tried to laugh it off, but her image burned in my mind like an afterimage from staring at the sun. A few nights later, just after sundown, I saw her again. I was cleaning up my workbench when a strange urge came over me. Not a thought, not a decision, a compulsion. I had to go outside, like something vital was waiting for me beyond those walls. I barely finished logging out before I was halfway to the front door, almost running. The moment I stepped out into the cooling twilight, I saw her. She stood beneath a small cluster of trees, her figure half hidden in the dusky gloom. My pulse quickened. Without fully understanding why, I walked toward her. My boots crunched on the gravel, each step loud in the still air. This was the green zone. Security was tight. Everyone was vetted. I wasn't afraid of her, at least not in the usual sense. But there was something about the sight of her, something that sent a chill creeping up my spine. She was wrong somehow. Out of place, out of time. I stopped a few feet away. She stared at me, her glowing eyes steady, unblinking. Then she spoke. "So you can see me." Her voice was smooth, perfect English, but there was something off about it, an echo, as though another voice was speaking the same words just beneath hers, far away. The air around us carried an eerie scent, a mix of spices, frankincense, myrrh, sandalwood, and cinnamon. It felt ancient, like the kind of smell that clung to sacred places long abandoned. "Yes," I said, my voice cracking. That was all I could manage. She studied me, her expression unreadable, then tilted her head slightly. "How is this possible?" I shrugged, baffled. "Because you're standing right in front of me?" Her eyes flared brighter, a cold, eerie light. She sighed, the sound heavy, as though she bore the weight of countless lifetimes. "All this time," she murmured, "and I am granted a fool, and a Ramang at that, alas." She leaned in slightly, her gaze flicking to the insignia on my uniform. "Friends," she whispered, almost to herself. "He is a prince, yet knows nothing of his nature. But even a prince of fools is still a prince." I blinked, trying to piece together her strange words. She locked eyes with me again, her voice sharp now. "Tell me, did you suffer a blow to the head as a child? Perhaps kicked by a camel? Any other woman, no matter how beautiful, and I'd have snapped back, told her where to shove her insults. But this wasn't any woman. Something about her made the air around us feel thin, like the world itself held its breath. "We don't have camels in Kentucky," I said finally. "And I'm not Ramang, I'm American." I pointed at the flag on my sleeve. "See?" She glanced at it, unimpressed. "You are from a Western empire. It doesn't matter. A province is still part of the whole. You are Ramang." She shook her head, as though explaining something obvious to a slow child. "None of that matters. The 5 winds have brought you to me. I must work with what I have." She paused, then said, "Come." It wasn't a request. Her tone was that of a queen commanding a servant. She turned on her heel and began walking north, not even glancing back to see if I followed. And I did. She was just behind me as we moved through the labyrinthine paths of the green zone. We passed by soldiers, workers, locals, dozens of people, yet not a single one gave us so much as a passing glance. It was as if we weren't there, like ghosts gliding silently through the crowd. Those walking toward us would shift their paths at the last possible moment, veering away as if nudged by an unseen force. It felt less like walking and more like being carried in her wake, caught in some unseen current. The scent of spices clung to her, stronger now, cinnamon, sandalwood, myrrh. But beneath it was something else, an undertone that spoke of age, of forgotten places and lost eras. I felt like I was walking through layers of time, as though she had pulled me back into a version of this city that predated its history. The modern world, the buildings, the people, the electric hum of the green zone, seemed like a thin veil over something far older, far darker. By the time we stopped, night had fully settled. We stood in front of a row of dilapidated houses on the edge of the zone. Most were crumbling, shadows of what they once were. But one stood out. Its windows were aglow with warm, flickering light, and its door stood wide open, a gaping mouth in the night. The house exuded an almost magnetic pull, but the passers-by hurried by, their steps quick and nervous. None dared look directly at it, as though fearing the house might see them. We stood silently for a long moment. Then, without shifting her gaze from the doorway, she spoke in a low whisper. "Do you see it? Do you see it yet?" I stared at the house, my eyes scanning its windows, the doorway, the porch. "No," I began, but my voice caught. Something moved behind one of the thin, tattered curtains. A shape emerged, indistinct but undeniably human, or so I thought. It paused as if staring back at us before it melted away into the shadows beyond. My mouth went dry. Could they see us? She didn't answer immediately, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Cloth is no barrier. It sees through the dark as clearly as I see you." She glanced at me then, her expression sharp. "Do you know nothing of the Afrit?" The word landed heavy, unfamiliar and ancient. I opened my mouth to reply, but she continued, her voice low and bitter. "Of course not. He doesn't even remember he's a prince. Not unless it's stitched on his tunic." I shook my head, confused and wary. "Why are we here?" Her voice hardened. "To retrieve something that belongs to me. That thing in there," she gestured to the house, "pretends to be a man, a dealer in antiques. In truth, it is a monster and unfaithful one. It has imprisoned members of my family, hoping to ransom them for forgiveness. As if such crimes could ever be forgiven." Her eyes flared, a searing blue-white, and for a moment, she seemed more flame than flesh. "You will go inside. Pretend to be what you are, an idiot Ramang. That should come easily enough. Say you're looking for trinkets." She reached into the folds of her scarf and withdrew a small sandalwood box, intricately carved and darkened with age. "Take this." I hesitated, eyeing the box warily. "What's in it? Some kind of eye aid?" She cocked her head, her expression almost amused. "Eyed? No, nothing so crude. What's inside will not harm you. Open it when you're inside. The rest will unfold as it must." I took the box with a reluctant hand, its weight surprisingly light. My mind raced, wondering where she had hidden it. Her clothes fit close to her form, yet this object had appeared as if conjured from the air. I looked back at her glowing eyes. "And what are you going to do?" "When the way is clear," she said, her voice like distant thunder, "I will answer." Without warning, she pressed her hands against my back, pushing me forward. "Now go." I stumbled across the street, clutching the box tightly. The air around the house grew thick, oppressive. The moment I stepped onto the threshold, a hot wind burst from inside, carrying the faint smell of sulfur and charred wood. It stopped me cold. Then, from within, a deep, resonant voice called out, laughter bubbling beneath each word. "Come in, my friend. Come in. You are one of the Crusaders, yes? No matter, no matter. All are welcome here." The hot wind receded, leaving a strange stillness. I could feel her watching me from the shadows behind, her presence a weight on my back, but I didn't dare turn. Instead, I stepped forward into the house as the door closed behind me with a heavy, echoing thud. The entranceway swallowed me in darkness, shadows shifting like serpents coiling and uncoiling in the corners. The air hissed softly, an almost imperceptible sound that felt alive. To my right, a doorway loomed, its threshold draped in strings of crimson beads. Beyond it pulsed a vivid red light, spilling out into the gloom like blood seeping through a wound. I pushed through the beaded curtain, stepping into a room that seemed to glow with an infernal light. Red and gold dominated everything. The furniture, the scattered treasures, even the air seemed to shimmer in those hues. Crates and chests piled high against the walls, their contents spilling over, ornate lamps, jeweled daggers, relics from forgotten times. The light seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere, bathing the room as if I stood within a furnace of smoldering coals. The heat was suffocating, far more oppressive than the night outside. And there, in the center of it all, stood a man. Tall and broad-shouldered, his presence loomed as if he were carved from stone. His age showed only in faint creases on his face, but the bulk of his frame spoke of a past life of raw strength. Perhaps a warrior, perhaps something worse. He was draped in finery of a bygone era, a deep red coat threaded with intricate gold patterns. His smile spread beneath a thick, neatly trimmed mustache, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome, welcome," he boomed, his voice warm but hollow, like the echo of a long-forgotten chant. "How fortunate that you have found your way to my humble shop. Here, many things await to delight and amaze you all at reasonable prices." He stepped forward, his polished boots clicking against the wooden floor. "You are alone, yes? No friends to guide you? No witnesses to your need? Your desperation must be great to come here, unaccompanied, so late in the day." I swallowed, the heat pressing on my chest, but before I could respond, he continued, "You are a Christian, perhaps, or a Jew. It matters not. All are welcome here. Only days ago, some of your friends came to me, one even bore the mark of your soldiers upon his arm." He gestured vaguely to his forearm, then laughed. "Ah, but you are not here for rugs, are you, my friend? Tell me, are you searching for yourself or for another?" The room's red glow flickered, the walls seeming to ripple as though made of molten wax. I forced myself to speak. "Not for me. There's a girl." At that, his eyes brightened, his grin widening. "Ah, say no more, my friend. I understand your need. A beautiful woman must not be denied. You wish to present her with a treasure, yes, something precious, unique." He moved with an unsettling grace, sweeping his arms to showcase his wares. Perfumes, silks, spices, or perhaps jewels. Rings for the fingers, the ears, a necklace. Gold, ivory, rubies. You have but to ask, and all at prices beyond fair. I barely heard him. The room seemed to pulse, the shimmering red growing brighter, the heat more oppressive. It was like standing in the heart of a dying sun. The walls flickered again, and for a moment, I saw them not as walls, but as seething, writhing flesh. The chests and crates, stacked high in the corners, appeared to rot away, collapsing into heaps of pale bones. The man's smile remained, but his face had changed. His teeth sharpened, jagged and stained, and his eyes gleamed with a cruel, unnatural light. The hissing sound from the entranceway grew louder, more frantic. Instinctively, I raised the small box in my hand. "Ah, but I'm looking for something like this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I held it up. The man's grin faltered, his eyes narrowing. "My friend," he said slowly, "this is, how shall I say it? A mere trinket. Nothing of value. You insult your lady by offering her something so meager when my shop overflows with wonders." Ignoring the sweat beading on my forehead, I snapped the clasp of the box open. "Not the box," I said, my voice low. "What's inside?" His expression shifted instantly. His eyes, once smug and calculating, widened in terror. He stumbled backward, hands raised as if warding off an unseen blow. "No," he gasped, his voice cracking. "No, you fool. Close it." Before I could react, a searing wind tore through the room. It howled with a voice of its own, ancient and angry, scattering the crimson beads at the doorway. The hissing from the shadows turned to shrieks, piercing and unholy, before vanishing into silence. The creature was in full panic now, his hands trembling as he made frantic, intricate symbols in the air. He muttered in a language I didn't recognize, but his fear was universal. The red light in the room dimmed, flickered, then died, plunging everything into darkness. In that black void, I heard it, the sound of walls groaning, the ceiling cracking. The house was collapsing, the structure itself rebelling against whatever ancient force had been unleashed. A final blast of hot air threw me backward, out of the house and into the cold night. The last thing I heard before everything went black was the sound of his voice, swallowed by the roar of falling timbers. When I came to, I was in an ambulance. The paramedics spoke in hurried tones, their faces pale. They told me I was lucky, miraculously unscathed, aside from a few cuts and bruises. The official report would later say that insurgents had rigged the house with explosives. I was just unlucky enough to walk into a trap that had detonated prematurely. Bodies were pulled from the wreckage. Their identities were never confirmed. That was the story everyone believed. I almost believed it myself. Until the third night in the hospital when she returned. The room was dark, the only light the pale glow of the full moon streaming through the window. She stood at the foot of my bed, her silhouette sharp against the silver light. Only her eyes burned in the dark blue-white flames that pierced the night. "So foolish, my Roman prince," she said softly. "You live. Good, you have done well. The Afrit is banished, and my kindred are free. But know this, you have made an enemy of the unfaithful. They will seek you." She leaned closer, the scent of cinnamon and spice enveloping me. "And yet, you have allies too. Should they come for you, call upon me." With that, she was gone, leaving behind only the faintest trace of warmth and the lingering scent of ancient spices.